the moment my daughter lifted her champagne glass to announce her engagement, I realized there was a man in the room who should not have been there. And the worst part? He was smiling at me. Not the polite kind of smile people give at family parties. No, this one was slow, knowing, almost amused, like he was waiting for me to remember something I had tried very hard to forget. The room around me was glowing with soft gold light. I had spent the entire afternoon decorating the backyard, stringing fairy lights across the old maple tree, arranging white roses along the tables, setting out the good china I had only used 3 times in 22 years. My daughter deserved something beautiful. After everything she had been through, she deserved a moment where the world felt gentle again. "Mom?" Her voice pulled me back. I blinked, realizing everyone had gone quiet. Emily stood near the center of the patio, her hands wrapped around a thin champagne flute. Her cheeks were flushed with happiness, the way they used to get when she was little and ran too hard in the summer heat. Beside her stood Daniel, her fiancé, a tall, well-mannered young man with kind eyes and a nervous habit of adjusting his watch whenever attention turned toward him. I had liked him from the moment she introduced us 6 months earlier, maybe even trusted him a little too quickly. Emily cleared her throat softly. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I know it's a small gathering, but it means everything to me to celebrate with the people I love most." Around us, friends and family smiled warmly. Someone in the corner clinked their glass in encouragement. The smell of grilled salmon and rosemary drifted from the buffet table. Somewhere behind me, my sister Linda whispered to her husband about how beautiful the decorations looked. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Emily reached for Daniel's hand. "We're so excited about this next chapter," she continued, "and we're grateful to have all of you supporting us." People began raising their glasses, and that's when my eyes drifted again to the man standing near the garden gate. He wasn't part of our family. He wasn't part of Daniel's family either. I knew every single person Daniel had introduced us to over the past months. Yet there he was, leaning casually against the fence as if he belonged. Tall, dark blazer, a face that carried the quiet confidence of someone who had never worried about consequences. And those eyes, I felt something cold slip down my spine, because I had seen those eyes before, years ago, in a place I had sworn never to revisit, not even in my memories. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "No," I told myself quietly, "that's impossible." But he noticed me staring, and that slow, unsettling smile returned. Emily lifted her glass. "To family," she said softly. Everyone echoed the toast, but I didn't drink, because suddenly the night I had spent weeks planning, the night meant to celebrate my daughter's future, had begun to feel like the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. Before that evening, my life had been quiet in the way middle-aged lives often become. Not boring, just steady. Predictable rhythms, familiar mornings. I worked 3 days a week at the local library downtown. It wasn't glamorous work, but I loved the quiet of it. The soft hum of fluorescent lights, the scent of old paper, the simple comfort of returning books to their proper place. After my husband passed away 8 years earlier, routines had become my anchor, and Emily, she became my purpose. She was 27 now, but there were still moments when I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Our relationship had always been close, not the suffocating kind of closeness some mothers try to force on their daughters, but the gentle kind built on trust. We talked about everything, her dreams, her disappointments, even her heartbreak 3 years ago when a man she had dated for nearly 5 years suddenly decided he wasn't ready for commitment. I remember how she sat at my kitchen table that night, staring into a cup of tea she never drank. "I feel stupid," she whispered. "You're not stupid," I told her. "Then why didn't I see it coming?" I had reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Because you loved him," I said softly, "and love sometimes makes us believe in people longer than we should." For a long time after that, Emily focused on her career. She worked in marketing for a small design company and seemed content building a life that didn't revolve around anyone else. Until Daniel appeared. They met at a charity event downtown, something about a fundraiser for a children's hospital. I remember the first night she told me about him. She came bursting through my front door with a grin so wide it reminded me of her teenage years. "Mom, I met someone." That simple sentence carried a kind of hopeful electricity I hadn't heard in her voice for years. When she brought Daniel over the following weekend, I watched them carefully, not suspiciously, just protectively. Daniel was polite, attentive, the kind of man who listened more than he talked. He helped clear dishes after dinner without being asked, and when Emily spoke, he looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Those little things matter to mothers. They tell you more about a man than fancy words ever could. Within a few months, they were inseparable. Then came the proposal. A quiet dinner, a simple ring, Emily crying happy tears on my couch while explaining every detail for nearly an hour. I hadn't seen her that joyful in years, which is why I threw the engagement party. not because it was expected, but because my daughter deserved a night where happiness filled every corner of the air. And until that moment by the garden gate, I thought that was exactly what she was getting. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, people resemble others all the time. Memories play tricks on us, especially the ones we've buried deep. Still, my eyes kept drifting back to him. He hadn't moved. He simply stood there, watching. Not Emily, not Daniel. Me. Finally, I leaned toward my sister Linda. "Do you know the man by the gate?" I whispered. She glanced over her shoulder. "No, should I?" My stomach tightened, because that meant he hadn't come with her, and he hadn't come with anyone I recognized, which raised a question I couldn't ignore anymore.
I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. Parties bring unexpected guests sometimes. A friend of a friend, a distant relative someone forgot to mention. It happens more often than people admit. Still, something about the way he watched me unsettled me deeply. Not curious, not friendly, intent. Like he had arrived at the party for a very specific reason, and that reason had something to do with me. I forced a polite smile as relatives began drifting toward the buffet table. Conversations restarted, laughter returned, and the tension that had briefly filled the patio dissolved back into celebration. Emily moved through the crowd like a small burst of sunshine, hugging friends and thanking everyone for coming. Daniel stayed close to her side, his hand resting lightly against her back. Watching them together filled me with the kind of quiet relief only a parent understands, the feeling that maybe your child had finally found the safe harbor you always hoped for them. But even that comfort couldn't fully quiet the unease building in my chest. The man at the gate finally pushed himself away from the fence. My breath caught. He walked slowly toward the patio, weaving between guests with casual ease. No hesitation, no awkwardness. He carried himself like someone who belonged there. When he reached the edge of the lights, he paused near the drink table and picked up a glass of champagne. Up close, the years were easier to see. Faint lines at the corners of his eyes, a hint of gray near his temples. But the face, it was the same. And suddenly my memory opened like an old door I had kept firmly locked. A hotel lobby, rain against the windows, and that man sitting across from me at a small round table while I tried to understand why he had been asking questions about my husband. My stomach twisted. No, I thought, it can't be him. Because if it was, then something from my past had just walked straight into my daughter's future. "Mom!" Emily's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. She approached with Daniel beside her, both of them glowing with that easy happiness young couples carry when everything still feels possible. "Have you tried the salmon yet?" she asked. "Daniel helped season it." Daniel gave a modest shrug. "I mostly just followed instructions." I smiled automatically. "It's delicious," I said. And it was. Flaky, warm, with just enough lemon to brighten the flavor. For a moment, the normal rhythm of conversation soothed me. Emily talked about the wedding venue they were considering, a small vineyard about an hour outside the city. Daniel joked about how terrible he would look trying to dance in front of 200 people. My sister Linda joined us, already halfway through a second glass of champagne. Everything felt ordinary again, until Emily suddenly said something that made my heart skip. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to tell you, Daniel invited a couple of people from work tonight." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, just a few colleagues. I hope that's okay." "Of course," I said gently. "The more the merrier." But even as I spoke, my eyes drifted across the patio. The man had moved again. Now he stood near the rose bushes, speaking quietly with someone. Daniel followed my gaze. "Oh," he said casually, "have you met Marcus yet?" The name landed in my chest like a dropped stone. Marcus. The man turned slightly as if he had heard us. Our eyes met again. And this time, there was no doubt. Recognition flashed across his face. He knew exactly who I was. Daniel waved him over. "Marcus, come meet Emily's mom." Every instinct inside me screamed to stop him, but the words never reached my mouth. Marcus approached slowly, that same controlled smile returning to his lips. Up close, the familiarity was undeniable. The memory that had been locked away for nearly a decade now stood 3 feet in front of me, holding a champagne glass. Daniel placed a friendly hand on his shoulder. "This is Marcus. He's one of our senior consultants." Marcus extended his hand toward me. His voice was smooth. "Mrs. Carter, it's nice to see you again." My hand froze midair. Emily blinked in confusion. "Again?" she asked.
Marcus kept his eyes on me. "Yes," he said calmly. "Your mother and I met once, a long time ago." The air around us seemed to thin. Emily looked at me. "Mom?" I forced my fingers to move, shaking Marcus's hand briefly. His grip was firm, confident. "Familiar. Too familiar." "Yes," I said carefully. "It was quite a while ago." Marcus smiled slightly wider. "I'm surprised you remember me." "Oh," I replied quietly. I never forgot. And that was the truth, because the last time I had seen Marcus, he had been investigating something that destroyed my husband's career. The memory returned in fragments as Marcus joined the conversation with unsettling ease. He complimented the decorations, praised the food, even joked politely with Emily about how lucky Daniel was. Anyone watching would have seen a perfectly pleasant guest. But beneath his calm voice, I sensed something else. Observation. Marcus wasn't here simply to celebrate an engagement. He was studying us. Studying me. And the longer he stayed near our group, the more my thoughts returned to that rainy afternoon 9 years earlier. Back when my husband, Richard Carter, still worked as a financial advisor at one of the largest firms in the city. Back before everything collapsed, before the investigation, before the quiet scandal that forced him to resign. Marcus had been there that day, not as a friend, not as a colleague, but as the man asking questions no one in our family wanted to answer. Questions about missing funds, about questionable accounts, about decisions my husband insisted were misunderstandings. Richard had spent months trying to clear his name, but the damage had already been done. Our lives changed after that. He lost his job, we sold our house, and a year later, he suffered the heart attack that took him away from Emily and me. I never knew exactly what Marcus had uncovered during that investigation. Richard refused to discuss it. "Just a misunderstanding," he always said. But seeing Marcus now, standing comfortably at my daughter's engagement party, a terrible possibility began forming in my mind. What if this wasn't coincidence? What if Marcus hadn't just wandered into Daniel's life randomly? What if he was here because of something that never truly ended? As laughter rose around the patio, Marcus lifted his glass slightly toward me. Not a toast, more like a quiet acknowledgement. Then he said something so softly only I could hear it. I wondered when we'd meet again. The chill that ran through me felt almost prophetic, because deep down, I knew this night was no longer about my daughter's engagement. It was about a secret that had followed our family for years, and somehow, Marcus had brought it back.
For the rest of the evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I watched someone. Not openly, not in a way anyone would notice, but quietly, carefully. Marcus blended into the party with unsettling ease. He spoke politely with guests, laughed at Daniel's jokes, even helped my sister carry plates to the kitchen. To anyone else, he looked like nothing more than a well-mannered colleague attending a celebration. But every so often, his eyes drifted back to me. Not aggressively, not threatening, just aware. And every time it happened, my chest tightened, because it confirmed what I had been afraid to admit to myself since he first stepped through the garden gate. Marcus hadn't forgotten me, which meant the past I had spent years trying to move beyond hadn't forgotten me either. Around 9 o'clock, the sky turned that deep blue color that only appears for a brief moment before night fully settles in. The fairy lights above the patio began to glow brighter against the darkening sky. Guests gathered near the dessert table, where Emily had insisted on serving a small strawberry cake instead of something overly fancy. Nothing dramatic, she told me while we baked it earlier that afternoon. Just something sweet. Watching her now, laughing with Daniel as they fed each other tiny bites of cake, filled me with both love and a growing sense of dread. Because if Marcus had truly come into our lives again, there was a chance the peace Emily had built might not be as secure as I hoped. I carried a stack of empty plates into the kitchen, grateful for the quiet moment away from the crowd. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and lemon from the cake. For a few seconds, I leaned against the counter and let out a slow breath. "You're imagining things," I told myself. "Marcus is just a coworker. Daniel probably has no idea about the past. And even if he did, it's been almost a decade. Whatever happened back then is finished." But just as that thought settled in my mind, the back door creaked open behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Marcus stepped inside. He closed the door gently, muffling the sound of music and conversation outside. For a moment, neither of us spoke.
Then he leaned casually against the kitchen island. "You still make lemon cake," he said quietly. The comment startled me. I turned slowly. "How would you know that?" Marcus shrugged slightly. "Your husband mentioned it once." The name hung in the air between us. Richard. Hearing someone outside the family say it after all these years felt strangely heavy. I folded my arms. "Why are you here, Marcus?" His expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. "I told you," he said. "Daniel and I work together." "That doesn't answer my question." A faint smile touched his lips. "You always were direct, and you always avoided giving straight answers." For a moment, something almost like amusement flickered across his face. Then it faded. Marcus straightened slightly. "Look," he said more quietly, "I didn't expect to see you tonight." "Then why did you greet me like an old friend?" "Because pretending we didn't know each other would have been strange." I studied his face carefully. 9 years ago, Marcus had been a financial investigator assigned to review irregularities within my husband's firm. Back then, he had asked polite but relentless questions. Questions that slowly chipped away at the version of events Richard kept insisting were misunderstandings. "Does Daniel know who you are?" I asked. Marcus hesitated. "Professionally?" he replied. "Yes." "No," I said firmly. "I mean, does he know about my husband?" The pause that followed told me everything. Marcus exhaled slowly. "No." Something inside my chest tightened. "Why not?" "Because it isn't relevant to him." "That's not your decision to make." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "You're worried." I laughed quietly, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Of course I'm worried." "About Daniel?" "About my daughter." For the first time that evening, Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Emily seems happy," he said. "She is. And Daniel cares about her." "You sound very sure." "I know the man I work with." His confidence unsettled me. "Then why are you here in my kitchen talking to me like we're sharing some secret?" Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said something that made the room feel colder. "Because secrets have a way of surfacing eventually." The words landed heavily between us. I stared at him. "What does that mean?" But Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the sink, setting his empty champagne glass beside it. "I spent a long time investigating your husband's case," he said finally. My throat tightened. "I know. And there were things we never fully proved." The air left my lungs. "What are you saying?" Marcus turned to face me again. "I'm saying, sometimes the truth takes years to come out." A chill crawled down my spine. "And you think it's coming out tonight?" Marcus held my gaze steadily. "No," he said. "I think it already started." Just then, the back door opened again. Emily stepped inside, smiling. "There you two are. We were wondering where—" Her voice stopped when she sensed the tension in the room. She looked between us. "Everything okay?" Marcus instantly returned to his easy, polite demeanor. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Your mom was just telling me about the garden." Emily laughed. "Oh, she'll talk about those roses for hours if you let her." I forced a smile. "Yes, they've been my pride and joy lately." She slipped her arm around mine. "Mom, Daniel's about to do a toast. Come on." As she led me back toward the patio, I glanced over my shoulder. Marcus remained standing in the kitchen doorway, watching us. And suddenly I understood something I hadn't considered before. Marcus hadn't come to destroy the past. He had come because something from that past had followed us into the present. And somehow, Daniel was connected to it. Outside, Daniel lifted his glass to begin his toast. Everyone gathered around. Emily squeezed my hand. But as Daniel began thanking our family for welcoming him so warmly, one question echoed in my mind louder than anything else. What if the man my daughter was about to marry? Emily looked between the three of us, her brows knitting together. There's a certain kind of silence that tells you something is wrong before anyone says a word. This was that kind of silence. She stepped a little closer. "Okay, now you're scaring me," she said lightly, though I could hear the unease creeping into her voice. "What's going on?" Daniel looked at me once more, as if asking for courage. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. But I didn't stop him either. He turned back to Emily. There's something about my family I should have told you a long time ago. Emily crossed her arms gently, not defensive, just confused. All right. Daniel exhaled slowly. My father was involved in a financial investigation years ago. Emily blinked. That sounds serious. It was. Marcus remained quietly against the wall, giving Daniel the space to speak. Daniel continued. The investigation involved several investment accounts. Money was moved illegally. Emily looked from Daniel to me. What does this have to do with Mom? The question hung in the air. Daniel's voice softened. Your father was part of that investigation. Emily froze. My dad? I felt my throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay silent. Daniel nodded. Yes. But my dad was accused, Emily said quickly. He lost his job because of it. Daniel swallowed. I know. The realization began creeping into her expression. Her voice dropped. Daniel, what are you saying? He took a step closer. My father used your dad's accounts to hide stolen money. Emily stared at him. At first, her face showed nothing but confusion. Then, slowly, the meaning landed. No, she whispered. Daniel didn't move. He manipulated the records, he said carefully. The investigation never fully proved your father's innocence. Emily's eyes started to me. Mom? The question inside her voice broke something in my chest. I nodded slowly. It's true that your father was blamed, I said quietly. But he didn't do it? She asked. Marcus stepped forward slightly. We now believe he didn't. Emily turned back to Daniel. And you knew this? Daniel's silence answered the question. Her face went pale. How long? A year. The number seemed to echo through the hallway. A year, she repeated softly. Daniel nodded. I've been working with Marcus to gather evidence. Emily shook her head slowly, as if trying to push the information away. And you didn't tell me? I wanted proof first. Her voice cracked slightly. So instead, you proposed to me? Daniel's shoulders sagged. I love you. Emily laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. That's not what I asked. The patio door opened behind her just then. My sister Linda stepped inside, holding a tray of empty glasses. She stopped when she saw the tension. Did I interrupt something? Emily turned toward her, still pale. Aunt Linda, did you know? Linda looked confused. Know what? Emily gestured toward Daniel helplessly. That his father is the reason my dad lost everything? The tray in Linda's hands rattled slightly. What? Daniel spoke quickly. It's more complicated than that. Marcus added calmly. We believe Richard Carter tried to report the fraud. Linda stared at me. Is that true? I nodded. It seems that way. Linda set the tray down slowly. So your husband was innocent all along? The weight of those words felt almost unbearable. For years, we didn't know, I said quietly. Emily's eyes filled with tears. My dad died thinking everyone believed he was a criminal. No one argued, because it was the painful truth. Guests outside began drifting toward the door, curious about the raised voices. Within moments, several family members stood in the hallway. Questions filled the air. What's happening? Is everything all right? Emily looked at Daniel again. So, let me understand this, she said slowly. Your father stole money, and my father was blamed. Daniel nodded. Yes. And you knew that? While planning our wedding? I was trying to fix it. Her voice rose slightly. Fix it? I'm reopening the case. Emily wiped her cheek. And when were you planning to tell me? Daniel hesitated. Soon. That single word broke the fragile calm she had been holding. Soon? She repeated. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a deep, wounded disbelief. You stood in front of everyone tonight and promised honesty while hiding something this big. Daniel looked devastated. I thought clearing your father's name would make the truth easier. Emily shook her head. You don't get to decide when someone deserves the truth. No one in the hallway spoke. The weight of the situation settled over everyone present. Family members exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked stunned. The story that had quietly haunted our family for years was suddenly public. And standing in the middle of it was my daughter, realizing that the man she loved had hidden the very truth that might have healed our past. Marcus spoke gently. Emily, Daniel really has been trying to uncover the evidence. She turned to him. And you helped him? Yes. Her expression softened slightly toward Marcus. At least you were honest tonight. Then she looked back at Daniel. But honesty after a proposal isn't the same thing. Daniel stepped toward her. Please don't walk away. Emily closed her eyes briefly. I'm not walking away, she said. I just need to understand who I'm marrying.
For a moment, none of us spoke. The hallway clock ticked softly above the doorway, each second sounding louder than the last. Daniel stood frozen in front of me, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. Marcus remained just behind him, watching quietly, not interfering, but clearly prepared for whatever came next. My voice, when it finally came, surprised even me. It was calm. Too calm. How long? I asked. Daniel swallowed. How long have you known? His eyes dropped briefly to the floor. About a year. A year. The number echoed inside my chest like a hollow knock against wood. A year of dinners in my home. A year of smiling conversations. A year of watching my daughter fall deeper in love with him, all while he carried a truth that could shatter everything she believed about our past. You knew, I repeated quietly, that your father used my husband's accounts to hide stolen money. Daniel nodded once. Yes. And you still let Emily build a life with you without telling her. His voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't know how. I felt something sharp rise in my throat. You start, I said slowly, with honesty. Marcus remained silent, his eyes moving between us carefully. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I had seen many times before. I was trying to confirm what actually happened, he said. The investigation files were sealed for years. I only got partial access after my father passed away. So you researched it, I said. Yes. And what did you find? Daniel hesitated. Marcus answered instead. We found that Richard Carter flagged irregular transfers before anyone else noticed them. My heart stuttered. Daniel nodded quickly. He tried to report them internally. But the accounts were already linked to his name, Marcus added. Your husband was managing those portfolios. The old wound inside my chest twisted painfully, which made him the easiest person to blame. Marcus didn't argue. Daniel stepped closer. Mrs. Carter, I swear to you, my father manipulated the records. And you knew that? Yes. And you said nothing. His voice cracked slightly. I was trying to fix it. I stared at him. Fix it? I've been working with Marcus to reopen the case. That made me blink. What? Marcus finally spoke again. Daniel contacted me last year. He suspected his father had been involved in something larger than the official investigation showed. Daniel nodded. I wanted proof before telling Emily. And proposing marriage felt like the right moment for that? His shoulders slumped slightly. No. The honesty in that single word hung heavily in the hallway. Then why did you do it? I asked. Daniel looked toward the patio doors where faint laughter still drifted in from the remaining guests. Because I fell in love with her. The simplicity of the answer caught me off guard. Love, I repeated quietly. Yes. And you thought building a life on a hidden truth would somehow protect her. Daniel looked at Marcus briefly, then back to me. I thought I could clear your husband's name first. My chest tightened. You thought you could fix the past quietly. Yes. But secrets rarely stay quiet, Marcus said gently. Daniel exhaled. I know that now. For a moment, the three of us stood there in silence again. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Does Emily know any of this? Both men answered at the same time. No. The word echoed painfully, which meant my daughter was still outside, smiling at guests, believing the man she loved had been honest with her. A dull ache spread through my chest. Does she know who your father was? I asked Daniel. He shook his head slowly. I told her he worked in finance. I didn't tell her about the investigation. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he hadn't, because if he had, Emily might have asked questions that led straight back to my husband. When I opened my eyes again, Daniel looked desperate. Please don't think I'm trying to hurt her, he said. That's exactly what you're doing, I replied. His face tightened. Then help me tell her. That request surprised me. You want me to help me? I want her to hear the truth from both of us. Marcus nodded quietly. It's better than letting her discover it accidentally later. I thought about Emily, her bright smile earlier that evening, the excitement in her voice while talking about wedding plans, how quickly that joy could disappear, how deeply betrayal cuts when it comes from someone you trust. And suddenly I realized something painful. Years ago, my husband had kept secrets too. Not lies, but silence. He never fully explained what happened with those accounts. He never fought the accusations as hard as he should have. Maybe he believed protecting us from the details was the kinder choice, but silence had destroyed him anyway. I looked at Daniel. You should have told her months ago. I know. You should have told me before tonight. I know that too. I sighed slowly. Outside, Emily's voice drifted through the patio doors. She was laughing about something my sister had said. The sound was light, innocent, untouched by the weight pressing down on the hallway. For a brief second, I wished I could keep it that way forever, but life rarely offers that kind of mercy. I straightened slightly. When she comes inside, I said quietly, you tell her everything.
Daniel nodded immediately. I will. No half-truths, I promise. And no protecting her from the parts that are uncomfortable. His voice softened. I understand. Marcus glanced toward the door. I think she's coming in now. Footsteps approached from the patio. Emily's voice floated down the hallway. Mom, are you still inside? Daniel looked at me one last time. Fear and determination sat side by side in his expression. Then Emily stepped into the hallway. She stopped immediately when she saw all three of us standing there. Her smile faded slightly. Why does it feel like I just walked into something serious? None of us answered right away. Finally, Daniel took a slow breath. Emily, there's something I need to tell you.
Daniel cleared his throat and raised his glass. The soft hum of conversation around the patio faded into quiet anticipation. Emily stood beside him, her hand tucked comfortably into his arm, her eyes shining with the kind of trust that only comes when you believe your future is safe. Watching her like that made what I was about to discover feel even heavier. I'm not very good at speeches, Daniel began with a nervous smile, but tonight means a lot to me. A few guests chuckled warmly. Daniel glanced at Emily. When I met Emily, I didn't expect my life to change the way it did. She's steady in a way I've never been. She makes everything feel clearer. Emily squeezed his arm. And meeting her family, he continued, especially Mrs. Carter, has been one of the greatest gifts. Several people turned toward me with friendly smiles. I nodded politely, but inside my thoughts were still tangled with Marcus's quiet warning in the kitchen. Sometimes the truth takes years to come out. Daniel continued his toast. I promise to take care of Emily, he said softly, and to build a life that makes her proud. Glasses lifted around the patio. To Emily and Daniel. Everyone echoed the cheer. Everyone, except Marcus. From where he stood near the edge of the garden lights, he watched Daniel with an expression that was thoughtful rather than celebratory. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't admiration either. It was the look of someone measuring something carefully. And suddenly I understood. Marcus wasn't just observing the party. He was observing Daniel. The evening slowly drifted towards its natural close. Guests began collecting purses and jackets. My sister wrapped leftover cake in foil while chatting with Emily about wedding colors. Laughter still filled the patio, but the energy had softened into the gentle tiredness that follows a good celebration. Daniel helped carry chairs toward the garage. Emily walked guests to their cars. And Marcus had disappeared. At first, I assumed he had simply left, but something about his sudden absence felt deliberate. I stepped inside the house to grab my purse from the hallway table. The living room lights were dim, the house quiet after hours of activity. That's when I heard voices, low, serious, coming from the study down the hall. The door was partially closed, but the voices were unmistakable. Marcus and Daniel. I didn't intend to listen, but my feet stopped anyway. Marcus spoke first. You should tell her. Daniel sighed heavily. Not tonight. She deserves to know. And ruin her engagement party? There was a pause. Then Marcus said something that made my heart start pounding. You should have told Emily the truth months ago. The silence that followed felt thick. Daniel finally spoke again, his voice lower now. I was going to. When? After the engagement. Marcus let out a quiet breath. That's not how honesty works. Daniel's voice hardened slightly. You don't get to lecture me about honesty. Marcus didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke again, his tone carried a weight that made my stomach twist. Your father stole millions from those clients, Daniel. My hand tightened against the wall. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly. Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he said something even worse. I know. My pulse roared in my ears. Marcus continued quietly. Those funds destroyed families, retirements, college savings. I know, Daniel repeated. And you're about to marry the daughter of the man who took the fall for it. The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Daniel spoke again, his voice almost pleading. My father is dead. That doesn't erase what happened. You think I don't know that? Marcus's tone softened slightly.
I think you're trying to outrun a truth that will eventually catch up. Daniel laughed bitterly. I'm not my father. No, Marcus said calmly. But your father used Richard Carter's accounts to hide the money. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. Richard, my husband, the man whose career had collapsed under accusations of financial misconduct. Marcus continued. We never proved Richard knowingly participated, but the records made it look like he did. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. I didn't know that part until last year. And when you did, I tried to figure out how to tell Emily. Another heavy silence. Marcus spoke again. And instead you proposed to her. I love her. That's not the issue. Then what is? Marcus's answer came quietly. The truth. At that moment, the hallway floor creaked beneath my foot. Both men fell silent. The study door opened slowly. Daniel stepped out first. The moment he saw me standing there, all the color drained from his face. Mrs. Carter? Marcus appeared behind him. Neither of them needed to ask how much I had heard, because the look on my face told them everything. For years, I had believed my husband died carrying a mistake he never fully explained. A misunderstanding. A tragedy of bad timing and incomplete evidence. But now, standing in that quiet hallway with Daniel staring at me in silent dread, the pieces began falling into place. Richard hadn't been the thief. He had been the scapegoat. And the real thief was Daniel's father, the man whose son was about to marry my daughter.
The house grew quiet after that. Not completely silent. A few guests were still outside finishing conversations near their cars. But inside the walls of my home, everything felt heavy with the weight of what had just been revealed. Emily walked into the living room and sat down slowly on the couch. Daniel remained standing a few feet away, uncertain whether he was welcome to move closer. Marcus quietly stepped back toward the hallway, giving them space, but he didn't leave. I stood near the doorway, my hands folded tightly together, watching my daughter process something that would change how she understood her entire childhood. For a long moment, Emily stared at the floor. Finally, she spoke. When Dad died, I thought the stress of that investigation broke him. Her voice was calm but fragile. I thought people believed he was guilty. Daniel swallowed. Many did. Emily nodded slowly. I remember how quiet he became that last year, she continued. He stopped going out with friends. He barely talked about work anymore. She looked up at Daniel. And now you're telling me he was actually trying to stop the fraud? Yes. While your father was committing it? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Emily let out a slow breath. Do you understand what that means for my family? I do. No, she said softly. You understand the facts, but you didn't live inside the consequences. Her words landed gently but firmly. Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he stepped forward and sat in the chair across from her. I know I can't erase what my father did, he said quietly, but I want to help correct it. Emily studied him carefully. And that's why you contacted Marcus? Daniel nodded. Yes. Marcus spoke from the hallway. Daniel came to me with documents his father kept hidden, records that suggest Richard Carter tried to report the suspicious transfers. Emily looked at him. So there's proof? Enough to reopen the case. Emily leaned back against the couch cushions. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears again, but this time the emotion felt different. Not just hurt, something closer to relief. My dad wasn't crazy, she whispered. No, I said softly. He wasn't. The truth of that moment settled into the room like a slow sunrise after a long night. For nearly a decade, our family had carried the quiet weight of doubt, the kind that creeps into your thoughts when everyone around you believes something different. But now, a new possibility existed. Richard Carter might finally be remembered for what he tried to do, not what people believed he had done. Emily wiped her cheek. But that still doesn't explain why you kept it from me, she said to Daniel.
Daniel leaned forward slightly. I was afraid. Of what? That you'd see me differently. Emily gave a small, tired smile. That's exactly what happened anyway. Daniel nodded sadly. I know. She studied him again, not with anger now, but with careful thought. You should have trusted me with the truth, she said. I should have. And if Marcus hadn't shown up tonight? Daniel didn't answer right away. Finally, he admitted quietly, I would have told you soon. Emily raised an eyebrow slightly. That word again. He sighed. Yes. The honesty between them felt fragile, but real. After a moment, Emily stood and walked slowly toward the window overlooking the backyard. The fairy light still glowed softly above the empty tables. The night had changed more than any of us expected. Daniel remained seated. Are you still angry with me? He asked gently. Emily looked out into the garden. I'm hurt. I understand. But I also understand why you wanted proof before reopening old wounds. Daniel looked surprised. You do? She nodded slightly. I grew up watching what those accusations did to my dad. She turned to face him again. If someone had told me years later that he was innocent, I'd want evidence too. Hope flickered across Daniel's face. But, she continued calmly, you should have trusted me enough to walk through that process with you. Daniel stood slowly. I want to start doing that now. Emily crossed her arms lightly. You don't get instant forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. What are you asking for? Daniel took a breath. A chance to finish what I started. Marcus spoke again from the hallway. Daniel came to me with documents his father kept hidden, records that suggest Richard Carter tried to report the suspicious transfers. Emily looked at him. So there's proof? Enough to reopen the case. Emily leaned back against the couch cushions. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears again, but this time the emotion felt different. Not just hurt. Something closer to relief. My dad wasn't crazy, she whispered. No, I said softly. He wasn't. The truth of that moment settled into the room like a slow sunrise after a long night. For nearly a decade, our family had carried the quiet weight of doubt. The kind that creeps into your thoughts when everyone around you believes something different. But now, a new possibility existed. Richard Carter might finally be remembered for what he tried to do, not what people believed he had done. Emily wiped her cheek. But that still doesn't explain why you kept it from me, she said to Daniel. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I was afraid. Of what? That you'd see me differently. Emily gave a small, tired smile. That's exactly what happened anyway. Daniel nodded sadly. I know. She studied him again, not with anger now, but with careful thought. You should have trusted me with the truth, she said. I should have. And if Marcus hadn't shown up tonight? Daniel didn't answer right away. Finally, he admitted quietly, I would have told you soon. Emily raised an eyebrow slightly. That word again. He sighed. The honesty between them felt fragile, but real. After a moment, Emily stood and walked slowly toward the window overlooking the backyard. The fairy light still glowed softly above the empty tables. The night had changed more than any of us expected. Daniel remained seated. Are you still angry with me? He asked gently. Emily looked out into the garden. I'm hurt. I understand. But I also understand why you wanted proof before reopening old wounds. Daniel looked surprised. You do? She nodded slightly. I grew up watching what those accusations did to my dad. If someone had told me years later that he was innocent, I'd want evidence too. Hope flickered across Daniel's face. But, she continued calmly, you should have trusted me enough to walk through that process with you. Daniel stood slowly. I want to start doing that now. Emily crossed her arms lightly. You don't get instant forgiveness. I'm not asking for it. What are you asking for? Daniel took a breath. A chance to finish what I started. Marcus spoke again from the hallway. Daniel came to me with documents his father kept hidden, records that suggest Richard Carter tried to report the suspicious transfers. Emily looked at him. So there's proof? Enough to reopen the case. Emily leaned back against the couch cushions. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears again, but this time the emotion felt different. not just hurt, something closer to relief. "My dad wasn't crazy," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "He wasn't." The truth of that moment settled into the room like a slow sunrise after a long night. For nearly a decade, our family had carried the quiet weight of doubt.
It's strange how a single evening can change the way you understand years of your life. When I woke up that morning, I thought I was preparing for a celebration, my daughter's engagement, a gathering of family and friends, a moment that would mark the beginning of her new chapter. I didn't expect that same evening to reopen a chapter I believed had closed forever. For nearly 9 years after my husband Richard died, I carried a quiet weight inside my chest. Not anger, not exactly shame, but something far more complicated: uncertainty. You see, when someone you love is accused of doing something wrong, even if you believe in them, the world around you has a way of planting small seeds of doubt. People stop asking questions. Friends change the subject when your spouse's name comes up. Conversations become polite but distant. And slowly, without meaning to, you start wondering whether there are parts of the story you never understood. Richard always insisted it was a misunderstanding, but he never explained the details. At the time, I believed he was trying to protect Emily and me from the ugliness of the situation. Looking back now, I realize something else. He may not have had the proof he needed to defend himself. And sometimes, when the truth doesn't have evidence behind it, silence becomes the only shield a person has left. For years after his death, I tried to move forward. Emily graduated college, she built her career, she fell in love, and slowly our lives began to feel normal again. But that night at the engagement party reminded me of something important. The past doesn't disappear just because we stop talking about it. Sometimes it waits quietly until the moment when truth finally catches up. When Marcus walked through my garden gate, I thought he had come to reopen an old wound. I thought he was bringing back a scandal that had already taken enough from our family. But in the end, Marcus wasn't the enemy I remembered. He was the man who helped Daniel uncover the truth my husband never got the chance to prove. And Daniel, the man I almost blamed for everything, turned out to be someone carrying the burden of his father's mistakes. That doesn't erase the hurt Emily felt when she realized he had kept such a painful secret. Trust is fragile like that. It doesn't break with shouting or arguments. Sometimes it breaks quietly, in the space between what someone should have said and what they chose to hide. But healing, I've learned, works in a similar way. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins with small decisions, honest conversations, the courage to face uncomfortable truths instead of burying them. In the months that followed that night, our lives shifted in ways none of us expected. Marcus and Daniel continued gathering records from the old investigation. They found documents Richard had submitted to the firm, warnings about unusual transfers that were ignored at the time. They found emails showing he had requested an internal audit weeks before the money disappeared. Piece by piece, the truth began assembling itself. Emily watched the process carefully. She didn't rush back into wedding planning. She didn't pretend everything was suddenly fine. But she also didn't walk away from Daniel. Instead, she did something far more difficult. She chose to rebuild trust slowly, conversation by conversation, truth by truth. And as for me, for the first time since Richard died, I stopped wondering whether I had believed in him too blindly. Because now I knew something with certainty. My husband had tried to do the right thing, even when the world misunderstood him, even when it cost him everything. There's a quiet kind of peace that comes from that knowledge. Not the loud celebration you see in movies when justice is served, but a softer feeling, like finally setting down a heavy suitcase you didn't realize you've been carrying for years. Sometimes closure doesn't look like revenge or victory. Sometimes it looks like clarity, like forgiveness, like the ability to remember someone you love without the shadow of doubt standing beside their memory. And that night, the night that started with fairy lights and strawberry cake, became something far more meaningful than an engagement party. It became the moment our family finally began to understand the truth, not the comfortable version, the real one. And now I want to ask you something, because stories like this, they happen more often than we realize. If you were in my place that night, standing in that hallway, hearing the truth about your past and your daughter's future at the same time, what would you have done? Would you have protected the secret a little longer? Or would you have chosen honesty, even if it meant risking everything? I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the truth takes years to surface, but when it finally does, it has the power to heal more than we ever expected.
People often think that when the truth finally comes out, life immediately becomes easier. But real life rarely works that way. The weeks after Emily's engagement party were some of the quietest our family had experienced in years. Not quiet in a bad way, just thoughtful. Everyone seemed to be walking a little more carefully with their words. Emily moved slower with her wedding plans.
The binder she had once filled with color samples and venue brochures sat closed on the dining room table for nearly a month. Daniel still came by the house, but the energy between them had changed. Not colder, but more honest. One evening, about 3 weeks after the party, I was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of tomato soup when Emily walked in. She leaned against the counter and watched the steam rise from the stove. "You know," she said, "I always thought Dad stopped fighting the accusations because he was tired." I kept stirring. "That's what I believe too." Emily nodded slowly. "But now it seems like he might have stopped because no one was listening." Her words lingered in the air like the scent of the soup simmering on the stove. I set the spoon down and turned toward her. "Sometimes," I said gently, "people lose their voice when the world decides it already knows the answer." Emily gave a small, thoughtful nod. "I wish I could ask him about it now." "I do too." She crossed her arms loosely and sighed. "But I'm glad we're learning the truth, even if it took this long." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the evening. Because she was right. Truth has its own timing, and sometimes the answers we need arrive years after the questions were first asked. Daniel and Marcus worked tirelessly during those months. They tracked old financial records, interviewed former employees from the firm, and gathered archived emails that had never been reviewed during the original investigation. Some nights, Daniel would sit at our dining room table surrounded by papers while Emily helped organize the documents. Watching them work together was different from watching them plan a wedding. There was less excitement, but more partnership, more respect. One evening, I overheard Daniel say something to Emily that quietly changed how I saw him. "I can't change what my father did," he told her, "but I can make sure the truth about your father is finally told." Emily looked at him for a long moment before replying. "Then let's do it together." There was no dramatic music, no grand declaration, just two people choosing honesty after a difficult beginning. And sometimes that's far more meaningful. About 6 months after the engagement party, Marcus called me one afternoon. His voice carried the calm tone I remembered from years earlier. "We've submitted the final evidence package," he said. My heart skipped slightly. "What happens now?" "The review board will reopen the case." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "That means Richard's record could be cleared?" "Yes." The word felt like sunlight after a long winter. It wouldn't bring my husband back. It wouldn't give him the chance to stand in front of the world and defend himself. But it would restore something important. His name. Later that evening, Emily and Daniel came over for dinner. I told them the news while we sat at the table. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. "Mom, that means people will know the truth." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "It's what your dad deserved all along." For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Emily smiled through her tears. "I think Dad would have liked you," she said softly to Daniel. Daniel's eyes glistened. "I hope so." Life didn't suddenly become perfect after that. Emily and Daniel still had difficult conversations. Trust takes time to rebuild. But their relationship became stronger in ways that surprised me. Because now there were no hidden shadows between them, no secrets waiting to surface. Just two people learning how to move forward honestly. Nearly a year after that engagement party, Emily invited me to lunch at a small cafe downtown. She arrived with a familiar binder in her hands, the same wedding planner she had closed months earlier. She sat down across from me and opened it. Inside were new pages, new dates, new venue photos. I raised an eyebrow. "Does this mean what I think it means?" Emily smiled. "It means we're ready." "For the wedding?" She nodded. "But this time," she added with a small laugh, "we're building it on the truth." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, and in that moment I realized something important. The night of her engagement party had felt like everything was falling apart. But in reality, it was the night our family finally began putting the pieces back together. So if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. Secrets may protect us for a while, but truth is what allows us to heal. And sometimes the most painful discoveries lead to the most meaningful new beginnings. Now, I'd love to ask you something. Have you ever discovered a truth that completely changed how you understood the past? And if you did it break something in your life? Or did it help you rebuild it stronger than before? I'd truly love to hear your story.